if you have the Venn diagram of the people Ron knew and trusted,
Yeah.
people who knew and understood Formula One media, and people who knew how Max Mosley particularly ticked, there's 7.5 billion people in the world, and those three Venn diagrams land up with one person in the middle. Just me.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Zach F1 channel, and today I am joined by a very special guest, that is Matt Bishop. Thank you very much for coming on to the channel. It's very exciting because I know you've worked with McLaren and Aston Martin.
I certainly have. And I'm very pleased to be on your channel, Zach.
Thank you very much. Going back to earlier in your life, I wanted to figure out, before social media, how did you find out about F1 results and anything like related to F1?
Well, it's an interesting question because I am exactly 40 years older than you, Zach.
Oh, okay.
So, I'm not to the day, but I know that I'm 61 and you're 21. So things were different when I was young. And of course there was no social media. Of course there was no internet. And the only way to find out about Formula One, therefore, was either on television, radio, or printed newspapers and magazines. That was it. However, when I was young, I'm talking about when I fell in love with the sport when I was, 10 years old.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 1972-ish. Formula One was so much less popular and famous than it is now that it wasn't even on the television, not in the UK. It wasn't on the television. Monaco Grand Prix and British Grand Prix was on, but probably not usually live. Just highlights, part of a sports roundup, World of Sport or Grandstand on ITV or BBC. So it wasn't to be found. And if you wanted to find the result of, let's say, the Argentine Grand Prix, in other words, a Grand Prix that BBC or ITV would not show, even as highlights, you had a choice. You either had to buy the Daily Telegraph, which not many 10-year-olds bought even then, let alone now.
Yeah.
Terrible newspaper. And look in the very, very back in the sports roundup, and motor racing, Formula One was there with croquet and bowls. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
And badminton.
Oh God.
You just have to recalibrate your mind about how unfamous Formula One was. And it wouldn't say a report. It would say first Emerson Fittipaldi, Lotus Ford. I see you're a Lotus fan.
Thank you very
or
much.
a Senna fan. Anyway, and second Carlos Reutemann, and third, Roddy Peterson, whoever it was. Yeah. It wouldn't say that someone else had led the race for 40 laps and his engine had blown. It might not even say if someone had died.
Oh.
That's how small. It was just news in brief in 4-point tiny letters. And then you had to wait till Wednesday, where you could buy Autocar or Motoring News, it's called Motorsport News now, or Thursday for Autosport. And it was impossible to find out anything more earlier than that. Everything changed in the UK when James Hunt won the 1976 World Championship, because he was a bit of a hero and a playboy, and he managed to get Formula One not only on the back pages of the newspapers but also on the front pages. Everything changed after that.
So big, very big.
Yeah, it was very big. Very big. I remember the back page of the Sun newspaper. I do actually read sensible newspapers, not just the Anyway, these are memories. But I remember, so in 1976, Hunt won the World Championship. It was the end of the year, of course, because he won it in Japan, the last race of the year, which is the first ever championship Formula One Japanese Grand Prix. Didn't win the race, he finished third, but he won the championship. And I remember I'd stayed up to watch it because that was on television, astonishingly and unusually, but it's because of the fever that Hunt had caused in the UK. But I remember getting up in the morning and going off to school. I would have been 13, and going on the Victoria line, because I always lived in London, going on the Victoria line to school, underground, and seeing somebody get on and open up the Sun newspaper, and the back page, it just said, "It's Hunt." I remember thinking, my sport is actually in the newspapers in a proper way. I couldn't believe it. And then, by 1978, all the races were on the television, and, then we had...
Was that straight onto the BBC?
BBC.
Yeah.
BBC, not always all live, and not always, and often the highlights, depending on the race. But Formula One had arrived in a big way, and Bernie Ecclestone had worked out how to make money and make himself make absolutely enormous money.
He's very rich. Okay, moving on to the start of your career. I know you started with Car Magazine, and then you moved on to F1 Racing. I wanted to ask you, at the time, because it was quite a new magazine, how did you transform it?
Well, first of all, I didn't transform it. I transformed it with a number of brilliant colleagues, one of whom you know quite well.
Yes,
since she's your aunt.
Yeah.
Anyway, Carrie Stammers, great friend of mine. Anyway, or Caroline, sometimes she likes to be called now, but she's always Carrie to me. Anyway, so I've been at Car Magazine, and I love cars and motor racing.
Yeah.
So I've been at Car Magazine for about 5 years, and it's a small little world, the motoring and motorsport press in the UK. So we used to meet each other on car launches, new car launches. So I knew all the Haymarket people, Mel Nichols, Steve Cropley, and so on, who were at Autocar, which was a sister magazine of F1 Racing. And F1 Racing had just been launched, and it had an editor, Mike Hurd, a young man who had been taken. He was the deputy editor of Autosport, but they'd asked him to be a caretaker editor while F1 Racing was being launched. And he was the son of Robin Hurd, by the way, the big designer, and the H of March, which is an acronym, so the March Formula One team.
Oh, okay, so very big.
Very big, and he worked for McLaren in senior design engineering positions as well. Anyway, brilliant designer. So Mike had been brought up in motor racing, but he didn't really want to stay in it. He wanted to go off and work in newspapers, which he then did. Very good journalist, very good editor, and he left to go and work for The Guardian. Last I've mentioned a proper newspaper. Anyway, he went off to The Guardian, and Steve Cropley and Mel Nichols, who was senior at Haymarket, which published F1 Racing, they reached out to me, sorry, that's an Americanism, but we'll have to live with it now, and said, would you like to come and be the first full-time editor of F1 Racing? So that was in late 1996, and I arrived in December 1996. I think they had done about 6 issues, so I arrived at that time. And I put Ayrton Senna on the first one, even though he died 2 years before, but then and now, he has an extraordinarily charismatic appeal. And we'd done an interview with Joe Ramirez, the great McLaren team coordinator, who had worked with so many people over the years and had worked with both Senna and Alan Prost. And it was an interview with Ramirez, but we kind of turned it around. You talked about how you transform things. Well, you're always just trying to find a story, or what I call a Jackanory. Find the Jackanory. So there's an interview with Joe Ramirez. That's nice enough. But there were some great quotes in there about his having worked with Senna and Prost. So we turned it round into a story which I remember all these years later, which I think it was called Why Senna Was Obsessed with Prost.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And we turned the story round, edited it so that it was that way round, with those priorities and that emphasis.
Yeah.
And then the front covers in those days were crucial, because the only way you could promote your magazine was what it looked like on the newsstand.
Yeah.
Front cover is an ad. It is an editorial page, but basically it's an ad, because the potential buyers are walking through the newsagent, whether it's a newsagent or at a station or an airport or wherever it is.
It's got to catch their eye,
It's got about a second or two to catch their eye. So it has to have a great image and a great cover line. Now it's different because it's online, but this is equivalent of SEO before online existed, if you like. Search engine optimization, obviously. So we found a great image of Senna, who had such brooding, looks, and even in his helmet he had his eyes, his very, very striking eyes. So we found that obviously brilliant yellow helmet, eyes, Senna, big letters, one word, why he was obsessed with Prost. And it was the best-selling issue we've done so far. Big jump.
Yeah.
Big jump. I remember it sold about on the UK newsstand, it sold about 15,000 more than any other had on the way before. And then we went into the next year, and there was the whole, Damon Hill won the championship, of course, in '96, so that was brought more interest to the UK. And then Schumacher was there. We started doing a German magazine, a German edition.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then Max's dad, Jos, was racing at that time, so we did a Dutch edition. And when I started at F1 Racing, it was sold in one language, English, and in one country, the UK. By the time I left, 11 years later, in 2007, we, and it absolutely we, a group of great people, had altered that. It was on sale in 34 languages in 110 countries.
So it really was a full switch around.
And it was being read by 3 million people every month.
Wow.
So we did very well. Did very well. It became the best-selling Formula One magazine, motorsport magazine in the world by a country mile. And then, obviously, nothing lasts forever.
Yeah.
Life itself doesn't last forever. And the internet is the internet. And it has revolutionised the world in so many ways, as we know, and we rely upon it. You know that if you lose your phone one day, you just
big issues.
You feel naked. You feel like you can't operate. Yeah. And yet we're talking about a time when some people had a mobile phone, but a lot of people didn't, and they weren't used for text, let alone getting online. Online didn't really exist. Just about existed. The information superhighway. But, people didn't Google anything. Don't think Google existed in 1996 or 1997.
Yeah.
First search engine I ever used was called Alta Vista.
Oh.
Not Google. Anyway, we're getting off the subject.
Yeah.
What I mean is that media was different.
Yes.
It was all about paper, or television, or radio.
So for anyone watching at home, could you explain to them what your job, actual title, and what you actually did at McLaren, so moving forward from the journalism, what a chief communications officer was?
Yeah, well, chief communications officer of a team, or anything, or an editor or a journalist in a magazine, are two sides of the same coin, in a sense. Because it's all about achieving optimal mainstream media coverage. Now, if you're an editor or a journalist working on a magazine or a newspaper, or nowadays on a website or on a blog or doing podcasts or doing the kind of thing that you're doing, YouTube videos, you want to make it high quality content that you think your readers or listeners or watchers, viewers will find interesting. And you want to promote it in the way, just like I was saying, you'd have a great front cover in the analog days. So you're now going to be thinking about how to make sure that you present this and package it.
It's got to have the best thumbnail possible.
Best thumbnail, the SEO's got to be right, you've got to support it on the right social media and post in the right way at the right time. You're going to do all that.
Yeah.
That's your generation. Mind you, I have to try and keep up with it as well. So it's two sides of the same coin. And if you're a journalist and an editor, you're always thinking about the jackanory, as I say, thinking about how to make whatever is happening in front of you appealing, exciting, memorable, informative, entertaining, provocative, all those things for your readers, viewers, listeners, etc. And when you cross to the dark side, which means you go into comms and PR, I don't know why it's called the dark side, because it's a less pure journalistic endeavour. You could say, or less pure media focused endeavour, and it's we're sometimes disparaged by people who regard us as spin doctors. There is a bit of spin doctoring sometimes, but actually what you're trying to do is get the best possible jackanory for the people that you're working for. So it's actually not so very different.
Okay.
And if you've been a journalist or an editor, I think it's much easier to be a good comms person. And not all of them have, by any means, and there's very good comms people, much better than me, who haven't. But I personally think it's a great advantage because you know how journalists think.
Yeah, you're already in that mindset. Sort of
you know what they're looking for. You know what would piss them off. You know what would make them think, oh, don't give me that. I'm not going to run that as a story. Or don't patronise me. Or don't package up a load of nonsense and try and make out it's a great jackanory. So you have to think of good jackanories. what does a chief communications officer do? He or she, usually with a team, and at McLaren there was a big team. McLaren very well funded then as now, and we basically just, when I arrived, we had Lewis Hamilton, great asset, obviously, brilliant driver, and but we'd arrived in the, or I had arrived in the wake of a terrible year, which was 2007, when the cars had been good on track, and Alonso and Hamilton had both won 4 races and almost won the Drivers' World Championship, but didn't. But McLaren got fined $100 million for illicit and unauthorised use of 780 pages of Ferrari IP. And that was an absolute disaster, but I wasn't there at that time.
Oh, okay.
But I was hired by Ron Dennis because of that, because he had been, and McLaren had been, absolutely vilified in the press and in the media. Encouraged by spin doctors, I would say. Richard Woods, who worked very closely with the FIA president then, Max Mosley, obviously no longer with us. I mean, Richard's with us, Max is not with us. And Luca Colliani, who was doing the same kind of job as an in-house comms director at Ferrari, working with Jean Todt. And McLaren had press officers, good ones, but they didn't and had never hired a strategic comms director. So they were ill-defended by the aggression of Woods and Colliani. And by the way, I'm friendly with both Woods and Colliani. Colliani now works for Pirelli. Woods runs his own agency. But as a result, the press were just killing McLaren and Ron every day. And it was at the Turkish Grand Prix in 2007. I was a journalist, still working as the editor of F1 Racing. And I knew Ron quite well by then. I mean, I'd been in the editor's chair for 11 years, and I'd interviewed him frequently, and I think he somehow thought I was an all right person, or a clever boy, or a good writer, or something like one of those 3 things. Anyway, he said, come and see me. And so I went into the big black McLaren brand centre, as it was called, and went to see him. And he was always miserable at that time, because he was, every time he woke up, he had an email saying, we've been shat on again.
I would be surprised.
and everything was going wrong. So anyway, he said, come and work for me. And he first offered me a job, actually. He and I had lunch at Magny-Cours in 2001, and he'd offered me a job, but it wasn't the right job and it wasn't the right money. But this time his back was at the wall. Back was to the wall. And it was a more senior job, and it was more senior money. I was in a lucky position because he needed someone who he knew, liked and trusted, trust being incredibly important to him at that very difficult time. He needed someone who knew the Formula One paddock, who knew the Formula One media scene. He also needed someone who understood what made Max Mosley tick, and I did. I'd interviewed Max Mosley many times. In fact, you could actually say I employed Max Mosley as a columnist. He did 12 columns in 1 year for F1 Racing, and that had happened a couple of years before. Ron was furious. Would you give him a column? Anyway, I said, well, why would I not give him a column? He's the president of the FIA. It's a coup. I knew coup. Anyway, so I did do that. So I knew him and Bernie Ecclestone, who of course was the iron fist in Max's velvet glove. So really, I was, if you have the Venn diagram of the people Ron knew and trusted, people who knew and understood Formula One media, and people who knew how Max Mosley particularly ticked, there's 7.5 billion people in the world, and those 3 Venn diagrams land up with one person in the middle. Just me. Pure luck. And therefore he offered me the job. And because of that, I was able to say, yes, I will do that job, but I do need a bit more money than you're going to offer me. And I had a bit of a financial revolution then, which was good. And I became a director of McLaren, and he paid me well.
And you were at McLaren for quite a while.
I was there for 10 years. I was there for 10 years. When I got there, I started on the 1st of January 2008. I had to do my notice period at F1 Racing. And, when I got there, I still have some of, the emails that I printed out
Yeah.
Not because I'm trying to nick anybody's IP, by the way, but just to remind me what it was like. And we were, and they're not really private and confidential emails. They're just emails that remind me of what I would call the defensive pessimism that absolutely infected everybody at McLaren. Don't forget, McLaren have been fined $100 million.
A lot.
A lot now, let alone a lot then. And, I mean, sponsors, very iffy. Are they going to walk? Are they going to stay around? And everything we did, let's face it, McLaren nearly died. And because of that, but it survived, everyone was very, very careful. And Max Mosley was, monstrously frightening person in terms of the way he would wield his power.
Yeah.
He had enormous power. Most people in Formula 1 had a love-hate relationship with Max Mosley. I certainly did. Ron just had a hate relationship, to be fair. But most people had a love-hate relationship. Yeah. And he wanted to make life a nightmare for McLaren at that time, and successfully did that. And I remember the emails, somebody would suggest, shall we have a drinks party for the press? Mm-hmm. All the replies would be, how would this be perceived by Max? How can we,
Everything revolving around him, yeah.
And unheard of. If you asked Zach Brown now, are you going to have a drinks party in the paddock for a number of journalists? Yeah. He'd either say yes or no. He wouldn't think, what will Mohammed bin Sulayem think?
Yeah.
It wouldn't cross his mind. Yet we were constantly focused on that. And then when we went to the first race of 2008, which was Australia, of course, Australia was almost always the first race in those days. And don't forget, we'd had all this terrible scandal, and we'd had the terrible big fine, and we were living in this defensive pessimism. Mm-hmm. And then we went down to Australia. And
that ended up being a pretty good season as well.
Unbelievable season. And fantastic season. And then, obviously, Raikkonen and Massa for Ferrari won a few races. I think they won a couple of races each. First race of the season, Australia, and then we won the Monaco Grand Prix, which has always been the jewel in Formula 1's crown. And then, as you know, I mean, I'm not going to run through the whole 2008 season, but I must admit, I could, without Googling anything, I could tell you almost absolutely everything, because I went to every race, I lived and breathed it, and I was in the Interlagos garage on the last lap.
I was going to say, I think we could speak about that for about 3 hours, that one lap.
Just amazing. Just absolutely amazing. Unbelievable.
Well, anyway. Talking about Hamilton, a little bit further down the line in McLaren, so around 2010, Jenson Button arrived. And I want to get your perspective on what was the team like at that point, having two champions with Hamilton and Button in the same team. It must have been quite a handful.
It was exciting. I remember we'd had a great season in 2008, won the World Championship, Drivers' World Championship.
Yeah.
2009, not such a good season. We built, technical term I think is shitbox. But we did improve it during the year. Yeah. And all credit to the engineers. And Lewis, I mean, I don't think Heikki Kovalainen, bless him, could really dredge much performance out of it. But Lewis was and is special.
And he still got a win that season, didn't he? 2. Yeah.
He won in Hungary and Singapore. Mm-hmm. Both quite slow circuits. The car wasn't good, even by the end, it wasn't good on quick circuits, really. Mm-hmm. But those two slow circuits, you don't need to give Lewis a sniff. We saw that the other day at Silverstone. Everyone thought, is the old boy still got what it takes?
Oh, he's definitely still got it.
He's still got what it takes. Give him a sniff of a win. And I mean, he drove brilliantly that day, just the other day at Silverstone. And I was delighted to see it. Anyway, that's very much off the point. But anyway, so we won 2 races. 2009 was a disappointed season all the same. Heikki wasn't going to be renewed, his contract. But obviously Lewis was. So who is going to be the teammate? And in charge were Ron Dennis and Martin Whitmarsh. And from my memory, and I have it in my diaries, but I don't have my diaries here at the front of me. They're upstairs in my study. From my memory, which is usually pretty good, he was in favour of Nick Heidfeld. And not a bad driver.
That would have been very interesting.
Yeah, Nick a good driver, by the way. Probably one of the best Formula 1 drivers never to have won a Grand Prix. Not the best, that's Chris Amon, but one of the best Formula 1 drivers never to have won a Grand Prix.
Yeah.
And there were others of us that were in favour of Jenson Button. And I remember Martin saying, but Jenson's not going to be available, Matt. You know, he's just won the World Championship for Brawn, which he had, brilliant achievement. And Mercedes have bought Brawn, and obviously they're going to just keep him on. I said, I don't think so. They're going to want this all-German super team. I know Richard Goddard, Jenson's manager, very, very well. And I think we'd have an opportunity to hire Jenson. And if we did, we would be able to tell the press, the world, the media, the fans, and the sponsors, and the prospective sponsors, we don't just have our own 2008 world champion, won the world championship in our own car. We also have the most recent world champion, Jenson Button. So we have the two most recent world champions in our car for 2010.
Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant opportunity. Brilliant Jackanory. Don't have to say what that word means now, because you know what it means in the story. And let's do that. And by the way, Martin now knows Richard Goddard very well, but he didn't then. And I had to broker that meeting, and in came Jenson, late on a Friday evening, and walked around the factory. We did it late on a Friday evening so that there wouldn't be that many staff there. Yeah. So the rumour wouldn't get out. And I remember Jenson walking around and just, because the McLaren Technology Centre is very impressive. And in those days, it was unrivalled in terms of how impressive.
Especially as, even though Brawn did win the championship, I know their facilities were very much underfunded. Completely different two worlds.
Totally. And Jenson was just walking around and looking like that. And I remember he just said, why don't you win every race? Which was quite a good question. Yeah. Anyway, he agreed to join. And that was very exciting. And I remember Mercedes, as it had then become, they were very upset, annoyed, because we couldn't tell them until just before we announced it. So I wrote the press release, and I think we told Mercedes, I'm going to say half an hour, quarter of an hour before we issued it. And Nick Fry, the bosses at that time were Ross Brawn, Nick Fry, Norbert Haug, Mercedes corporate side. Yeah. And Nick Fry was livid to be pushed onto the back foot in that way. And by the way, I'm friendly with Nick Fry now. But he wanted to give someone at McLaren a bollocking. So he tried to ring Ron. Ron didn't answer his phone. He tried to ring Martin. Martin didn't answer his phone. I think they probably looked at it and thought, no, I'm not talking to you. Yeah. So the next person he thought to ring was me. And I thought, I can't not take his call because I know what it's about. Yeah. And I answered the phone. I was upstairs in my study upstairs. I was at home that day, working from home because I'd been on it since 6 a.m. I just couldn't even afford to be out of contact for the 45 minutes it takes to drive from here in Earlsfield, South London, to Woking. So I worked from home that morning, and my phone rang and it was Nick Fry. And my God, this is a family show.
I can imagine.
So, let me just tell you, the words that he used began with F and C.
Oh, okay, so he went full on.
But he's actually apologised for it since. Yeah. And in his autobiography, he said, I think I probably went over the top with poor Matt at that stage.
So moving on from your McLaren days, this is more of a your opinions on the sort of modernisation of F1, you could say. So obviously F1 got bought out, and I was wondering, what are your opinions on all of these new things they're adding, such as Drive to Survive? Because I know it's very 50-50 with some fans, some old fans not very much liking it, but it bringing in a lot of new fans.
So my view is I'm positive about Drive to Survive. I know I'm not the target audience. But I understand that not all comms initiatives and programs around Formula 1 should be targeted to me. Why should they be? Yeah. I'm a 61-year-old F1 lifer who's been around the sport for a long time, and my support and enthusiasm for it is probably guaranteed. I can't really imagine a life without following Formula One in one shape or another. Having worked in it for 33 years, it's like it's part of my life. And having been a Formula One fan, because I still am, for 50 years, half a century. So yeah, I'm not. They don't have to worry about me. Yeah. I'm always going to turn the television on, and I'm always going to tweet about it, and in my case, blog about it, and podcast about it, and write columns and all the rest of it, and books and whatever. So in that case, I'm not the worry. But the worry, I think, was that the demographic of the fan base was ageing, and very male, and Drive to Survive has been absolutely fantastic. By the way, the credit for it, the idea, it was a man called Sean Bratches, who worked for Liberty Media, who, as you know, have taken over the ownership of the sport, he was an American sports marketer. And I remember we had a thing called the Promotional Working Group, which was one comms person and one marketing person from each team. So it's 10 teams, 20 people, and we used to meet at the Sofitel Hotel in Terminal 5 at Heathrow, and I was the chairman of it. I worked for McLaren, I was the chairman of it. Yep. And it was called the Promotional Working Group. We used to meet, I think, monthly. And we invited Sean Bratches to come, and he talked about wanting to do a series that would broaden the demographic and make it more appealing to young people, women, and Americans. Yeah. 3 important demographics that we had never really managed to nail as Formula One, as a body of people. Yeah. And I remember him saying, which do you think we should put it on, Amazon Prime or Netflix? And we had a discussion, and I remember saying, I'm not an expert, but I remember saying, for me, I've got both, I watch both, but Amazon Prime still to me seems like, and I'm talking about then, might be less now, still to me seems like something you buy things on, and you might just remember to watch it from time to time. Netflix is just about watching things, it's nothing else. So let's go for Netflix, And that was the agreement, and Sean said, well, that was my thought as well, but I wanted to know everybody else's view. Yeah. We agreed to go for Netflix, and he pitched it, and it happened. But you remember the very first year of Drive to Survive, Mercedes and Ferrari refused to take part.
I remember that, yes.
They thought it was absolute waste of time and nonsense. And then, it turned out to be not a waste of time and not nonsense. It turned out to be enormously successful, and it did absolutely reach and inspire those 3 new demographics. Youngsters, women and Americans. And, I mean, you would have been a teenager when that first happened. Yep. And did it inspire you?
Very much. I remember...
Not that you're a woman or American, but you were a young person.
At the time, it did help me keep interested in the sport, because it was the time where I myself support McLaren. At the time, they weren't doing very well. And
I would have been working there.
It would have been quite a struggle every week. I remember going into a race knowing that the team I'm watching isn't going to be doing too well. So then seeing all of the drama happening afterwards, it was nice to watch.
I think it's great telly. Yeah. And it
you've got to remember that though, isn't it? It is just telly though, isn't it?
Exactly, Zach. It's telly. And it isn't... This is why it does get some slagging on social media, and particularly older people, because they say, well, that isn't exactly how it happened. No. And I remember there was one year, you might be able to remember whether it was Series 2 or Series 4 or whatever. Yeah. But whatever year it was, when the 2 McLaren drivers were Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris, and the narrative that they decided to go for is that they hate each other and they were always at each other's throats. They didn't. They
loved each other. Yeah.
I wasn't at McLaren anymore. I'd moved on, but I knew very well they liked each other. They got on well. But the idea was they were at each other's throats. Then you get these larger than life characters. And a friend of mine, in fact, I worked with him quite recently in the context of my agency, Diagonal Comms, and one of our clients, Buffalo Trace. There you are, name drop.
Very nice.
But it is Guenther Steiner. So Guenther Steiner, and I like him, and I worked with him, and he wasn't famous. And then along came, Drive to Survive, and because of his distinctive way of speaking English and swearing, he became a superstar. We look like wonders. All that business. And he became, and when I was just the other day we were working and we were filming in Covent Garden, and he was being stopped to do selfies in Long Acre, which is a road in Covent Garden in London. I mean, before Drive to Survive, nobody would have batted an eyelid at him. Not disparaging him, but he was just a kind of one of the people that works in Formula One.
Yeah.
Bruno Famin, who works for Alpine, maybe not for much longer. Nobody would stop him for a selfie in Long Acre in Covent Garden. Guenther Steiner wasn't British. He wasn't in a successful team, and yet we had to stop interrupting the filming because of selfies. Anyway, so that's Drive to Survive, pure Drive to Survive. It has engaged younger people, it has engaged women, it has engaged America. I'll give you one little story about that. My husband is, I'm a gay man, my husband is 20 years younger than me. And some of his friends, we've been together 15 years. Yeah. And one of his, some of his friends, when they first got to know me, they'd say, "What do you work in? Is it Formula One?" And I'd say, "Yeah." This is like gay men in their mid to late 20s. Yeah. And they'd say, "Yeah, I think my dad watches that," or even, "I think my granddad watches that." And I used to think, "Oh God, that is a sign of the times." Yeah. When men in their 20s are saying, "My dad or my granddad," not me. I don't watch it. Yeah. Now, fast forward 15 years, when I meet people of that age in their 20s, they say, "Are you working Formula One?" I say, "Well, yeah, Motorsport, I have worked in Formula One," and blah, blah, blah. They say, "What's Lewis Hamilton really like?" Is Kevin Magnussen, does he slam the door all the time, really? Is Lando Norris a good guy? Is Max Verstappen as bad-tempered as he appears? They ask all these questions, and it's because of Drive to Survive. Yeah. And now they want to ask me. They didn't used to.
Keeping on to that point, with F1 trying to innovate itself, what do you think about sprint race weekends? Because I know that's another hot topic.
Not my cup of tea. Yeah. Not my cup of tea. I think, but it's not. It's just not my cup of tea. Yeah. I'm not criticising it. I'll tell you why. Because sport requires an appointment to view, and it requires therefore, an absolute regular expectation. You know that practice is going to be on Friday. Yep. Qualifying is going to be on a Saturday, and the race is going to be on a Sunday. Okay, the time may change because Brazil's not going to be at the same time as Australia. But within that context, you still know that that's what to expect. And I thought when they started having, qualifying on a Friday afternoon, which meant that fans often couldn't watch qualifying because they were either at work or at school if they were younger. And I missed it because I was working or I was in meetings or I was hurrying between meetings on the tube in London. This is when I stopped working for Formula One teams. The last year in which I worked full-time for a Formula One team was 2022. And then, of course, I was at all the races. Yeah. I was at almost all the races for the best part of 30 years, 25 years. Anyway, not now, but then you start missing things. And then you suddenly look at your Twitter and think, and it says Verstappen's on pole, and you think, what? It was quali today. And I even follow the sport, and I've worked in it for a third of a century. So I think that appointment to view it has been diluted and dissipated by the sprint race. And also I think the sprint race isn't really a sprint race. It's just another race.
Yeah, basically.
And it isn't. But people who win sprint races, have I won the Monaco Grand Prix? Well, no, not. Well, they don't sprint. But wherever they sprint, have I won the Brazilian Grand Prix? Well, I haven't really.
Well, it was very similar to like how lackluster it is. Obviously, Oscar Piastri got his first win last weekend. Technically, he had a sprint race win, but it didn't really matter.
Didn't matter.
No.
So it's not my cup of tea. I'd love the sprint races to disappear. They were Ross Brawn's idea. And Ross Brawn has, he's a great guy, huge experience, wonderfully successful. Yeah. Minted, has done everything you can possibly do in Formula One other than get in the car and drive it. Yeah. And he has a huge amount of influence, or he did particularly have a huge amount of influence and gravitas, and I respect and like him actually. But I think he's mistaken. I personally would like to see other things. Okay. I'd like to see something like, in the late 70s there was a thing called Procar. Procar was sponsored by BMW, and there was a new mid-engined BMW supercar called the M1, beautiful car, mid-mounted V6 engine, 277 horsepower, which was a lot in those days. Bugger all now, I know, but it was a lot then, and a light car.
Yeah.
And in order to promote it, there was a one-make series in BMW M1 cars. So you could run a team and enter Pro Car, and you'd have your regular drivers, but also 5 places on the grid, the top 5 places on the grid, were reserved for the top 5 qualifiers in the Formula One race.
Yeah.
And there were 5 Pro Cars. So if Carlos Reutemann, Alan Jones, Didier Pironi, Jacques Lafitte and Nelson Piquet were the top 5, they would automatically get an entry into the Pro Car race and race alongside, sports car races, GT races, touring car races.
I bet they loved it as well.
They loved it, and they got paid in cash by Bernie Ecclestone for their wins or wherever they ended up finishing. And, all those that I've just mentioned did well. I remember being at Brands Hatch in 1980 and watching Carlos Reutemann win the Pro Car race. And, fantastic. And imagine now if we knew that we're sitting down to watch the, let's say, a race in the Italian Grand Prix. Italian Grand Prix 2024. And you knew on the morning of the race or the day before, this is pie in the sky, it probably never happened now. Million complicated reasons around, commercial conflicts and all the rest of it. And by the way, the Renault and Alfa Romeo and Ferrari drivers didn't enter it because they didn't want to promote BMW.
Okay, yeah.
So that might still be the case.
Yeah.
But anyway, imagine if you knew that you were going to watch a one-make race with all the top 5 Formula One qualifiers on it. Verstappen, Hamilton, Piastri, Norris and Russell, in amongst touring car drivers and GT. Imagine how exciting it would be.
I'd be well excited, yeah.
And I actually put an idea to, this is 20 years ago, to Herbie Blash, who worked for the FIA at the time, and Charlie Whiting, no longer with us, who worked for the FIA at the time. And I asked them to help me put together an idea to Bernie Ecclestone, which would be a way of making the Porsche Super Cup more exciting. Because the Porsche Super Cup has supported Formula One for years and years and years. And it's lucrative to Porsche because, rich Swedish orthodontists buy a Porsche and go racing in it. And hopefully have a few shunts, not big ones. And then Porsche charge them an absolute fortune to fix the shunts. Just a bit of accident damage is always always lucrative. So obviously you don't want them to hurt themselves.
No, of course,
Knock a corner off the car, great, 10 grand. So that keeps going, and but nobody really watches it, or not that many people watch it. But they're great cars. 911s are cool. 911s are iconic. And Porsche had just launched the Boxster, or maybe they just launched a facelifted Boxster, which of course is an open top car, convertible car. And I remember saying to Herbie, why don't we relaunch Pro Car using Porsche Boxsters? Better Boxsters, because even the Pro Car was a closed coupe. But even better to have an open car. You put a roll hoop on it, a proper roll hoop, because then you can see the driver, you can see the driver's arms flailing, you can see the helmet. And why don't we do it where ex-drivers, let's say over the age of 45, can take part. So, and particularly those who are commentating. So Martin Brundle, so Ivan Capelli, so all those other, Jacques Lafitte, as was back in the day. Ex-Formula One drivers who are now commentating. And you have in-car camera, and therefore you tune into 2010 Italian Grand Prix, and the first bit of the broadcast will be in-car with Martin Brundle winning the race, or coming third, or dicing with Patrick Tambay, no longer with us, and who all these people commentated on television at the time as ex-drivers, and saying, here we're going now, we're about to join the coverage for the Italian Grand Prix, but let's have a look at our man Martin Brundle. how he got on, because he had a great dice with Patrick Tambay, and in the end Tambay won and Brundle was second. But have a look at how they this great move into the second Lesmo or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then Martin, you hear him commentating, and then it would be great. It would be absolutely great. It'll never happen. Pie in the sky, naive. Somebody's probably watching this now saying, silly old man. But guess what? If it happened, you'd watch it.
So, going into 2026, new regulations coming in. Obviously, you've been watching the sport, like you said, for a long time. And we've had DRS introduced, and now it's being taken out again. How do you feel about this? Is it good for the sport, or...?
I've never been a big DRS fan, simply because I never personally thought that the greatest problem the sport faced was a lack of overtaking. I can think of races where there wasn't very much overtaking, but were still nail-bitingly tense.
Yeah.
I think, if I'm trying to remember the year right, the 2003 Monaco Grand Prix, I think that was a very exciting race. Raikkonen just behind, I think, from memory. So Montoya in the Williams and Raikkonen in the McLaren. And they were never far apart, but there was never quite an opportunity to pass. You know, and 11 years before that, in 1992, Senna won in the McLaren, and Mansell caught him hand over fist in the last laps in the much faster Williams, but wasn't able to overtake. I know Monaco's special, but brilliant defending by Senna. Now that's gone down as a classic race, and you can go and look at it at YouTube and just admire the subtlety of Senna's defence.
Yeah.
Now if there'd been DRS and Mansell had swooped past, we wouldn't even remember the race. Yeah. Wouldn't even remember the race. So I think it was always an overrated problem, probably media fuelled by a lot of journalists saying, oh, there's been no overtaking today. I don't actually think it has ever been the major problem of the sport. And by the way, the sport is a good sport and has always been a good sport. Personally, I think more important problems now are things like fan access. I think fans need to get better access, which includes affordable prices. You know, the cost of going to Silverstone for the British Grand Prix.
Ridiculous.
Literally prohibitive. It prohibits you from being able to do it unless you're very well off.
Well, yeah, it's... well, on top of that, it was crazy how, like a race like Hungary, it'd be cheaper to fly all the way over there,
it is cheaper.
Go to there, and that's crazy.
I know. Or the easiest race to go to for a Brit is Spa. Just get in your car, drive to Spa, and save a load of money compared with going to Silverstone. It shouldn't be like that. I think that's a problem. I think the cars are too ugly and too big, particularly too big, too long. You know, in my day, I know now is still my day. Yeah. But when I fell in love with the sport in the 70s, a Formula One car, let's say a beautiful Ferrari 312T, 1975 car, that was as long as, you know, Ford Focus now. The Ferrari this year, it's as long as a long wheelbase Mercedes S-Class. I'm not exaggerating. Wow. That is the difference in length. They're not, by the way, wider. They're just longer. And you do get used to these things. Whenever there's a change, people say, oh, I don't like that. Like when the Halo came in. Oh, I don't like that. But we get used to these things. But actually, they are too big. You know, if you look at a photograph from the Monaco Grand Prix in the 60s, you could go 3 abreast round the Lowe's hairpin. Wow. Now you almost need a 3-point turn to get round at all on your own in one of these cars. They're too big. They're too ugly. I think that I do hope that the new Formula is a more exciting engine, and maybe people will be annoyed with me to hear this, but I do think they should sound better. I know noise is actually waste. That's literally what it is. Technically, scientifically, noise is waste, and therefore if you have a super thermally efficient engine, it will make less noise. I realise that, but you know, I remember in recent years, you know, the current Formula One cars sound like, you know, super powerful vacuum cleaners, and then there'd be a parade lap from a 70s car which had, let's say, a Ford Cosworth engine, you know, a Lotus, or a McLaren, or a Tyrrell, or a Shadow, or a Penske, any car that was in the 70s. And we didn't think that Cosworth engines sounded great. We thought the ones that sounded great were Ferraris, Brabham Alphas, Ligier Matras. But now when you hear a Cosworth, you think it sounds the nuts, and compared with a modern car. So I think it'd be nice to have more sonorous, more beautiful, smaller, shorter cars. And do we need DRS? I don't particularly think we do. I liked the 1982 season. I like lots of seasons, but the 1982 season, the cars had profound ground effect. Ground effect had been in existence for 4 years. All the teams had worked out how to make it work. And in many of the circuits, they dispensed with front wings. The other day, I do a lot on Twitter, and I do a thing called #OnThisDay. So #OnThisDay, Sterling Moss won the Monaco Grand Prix, or #OnThisDay, this and that happened.
Yeah.
And I did a #OnThisDay from Paul Ricard, the French Grand Prix in 1982, a start shot showing all the cars. And almost all of them, absolutely almost all of them had no front wings at all. So they looked, I think, better. They had grip generated by ground effect and big rear wings, and you could overtake because the dirty air in front of you didn't matter so much because there was no front wing to be discombobulated. So my personal view would be to reverse engineer an absolutely sexy Formula One car. So something like a 1982 Renault, or a have a little focus group and ask fans which you think is more beautiful. A 1991 Ferrari, a 1998 McLaren. Look at cars that you think are great. Take the front wings off, reverse engineer a way to make them stop, steer and handle safely and quick, do something about the engines, make them shorter, go racing, and have a one-make championship instead of sprints. There you are, I'll fix Formula One.
There you go. And then moving back onto more of your life with Aston Martin. So it actually does tie a bit back to Drive to Survive in essence, but we've seen a lot with Lawrence Stroll, and I just wanted to ask you, especially working with that team at the time, was it very clear that he was just running that team for his son, or was it still that he really wanted to be there and he wanted to make Aston Martin a massive team?
Well, the only fair answer is a bit of both.
Yeah.
Lawrence Stroll is a real petrol head. He's a real petrol head. Not a terrible driver himself. He was never going to become a Formula 1 driver or a professional racing driver. And he was, super focused on business, which he's done extremely well at. He's richer than...
Oh, very rich.
He's richer than these newspaper reports report him as. He's richer than that. He is a multi-billionaire. Quite a lot of billions.
Yeah.
So he's done extremely well, and credit to him for that. And he really loves cars, and he really loves motor racing, and he really loves his son. And by the way, that's also a feather in his cap, because who criticises a father for loving their son? So that's the background. When he realised that his son was quick, and by the way, let's just press pause here, because some people watching will say, oh, he's not very good, Lance Stroll. Actually, he is good. He may not be as good as Max Verstappen, but then there's quite a lot of drivers who are not as good as Max Verstappen.
Well, yeah, it's very hard to compare him when his teammates, Fernando Alonso, two-time world champion.
One of the best in recent decades. So, one of my best friends of the current grid is Kevin Magnussen. Well, he's not as good as Max Verstappen either, but his dad's not a multi-billionaire, so he doesn't get the same kind of criticism for it. Anyway, so there you are. Sorry, Kevin, if you're watching, but there you go. Very few people have been as good as Max Verstappen. And by the way, I could say some of the other top drivers at the moment, which is including Alonso, including Hamilton, including Leclerc, including, I've probably forgotten somebody else will say, why on earth didn't you mention so-and-so? But the top drivers, George Russell, Carlos Sainz. Must I mention someone else will be pissed off if I haven't mentioned them? Anyway, you take my point.
Yeah.
That the fact that Lance Stroll is not at that absolute level, but he's one level down. Early laps, his lap ones are usually quite good.
Yeah.
First lap. And he's actually done quite well in recent races, stacked up against Alonso. So let's just put that there. Now, when it became clear that he had the talent to go to Formula One, because Lawrence loves him and because Lawrence is minted, he was able to advantage his rise to Formula One in a way that almost nobody else has ever had done for them. You know, you want to race in Formula 3, right, I'll buy you a Formula 3 team, etc., etc. And that went all the way, Prema, you know, who he raced for. And endless testing and all those kind of things. And if you love your son and you're minted, why would you not do that?
Yeah.
And it's just not available to most people because it's so expensive. But he never stopped that blueprint, and that included buying a Formula One team for him. However, Lawrence Stroll also loves Aston Martin, the brand, and loves road cars. So when he realised that he could buy the largest single shareholding in Aston Martin and do his best to turn it around, because it's been a great company for more than 100 years, and it's made some great cars, but it's never made any money. Not in 100 years. And if he thought, if I can do that, continue to make great cars, build the brand and make it profitable, which is a difficult job which he's still engaged in. And if I can then buy a team and call it Aston Martin, and the race team can promote the road cars, and the road cars can promote the race team, and call them both Aston Martin. And he did that because he bought Racing Point, and indeed brought me in to do the comms and PR for a couple of years, 2021 and 2022. Then I've got an opportunity to give my son a Formula One career, create a business, a franchise. And by the way, he probably wouldn't have done it if there hadn't been a budget cap. Because the budget cap means that you can, spend 140 million or whatever it is now, rather than 340 million, which makes a huge difference. And promote my road cars and make my road cars profitable. That's the theory. I would imagine that Lawrence Stroll, who is an extremely wise and wily businessman, has sunk a lot of money into this project yet so far. But when the time comes, whenever it comes, and he's only 25, Lance,
got a long.
So whenever it comes that Lance says, okay, I've had enough, then I would imagine, and I don't know this, but I would imagine that Lawrence will sell. And he may even already be beginning quietly and discreetly to be lining up the buyer when that time comes. I'm not saying I know that, I don't know that, but that's the way he operates, and that's how he's become a multi-billionaire, by being clever, canny, wily, strategic, and thinking long term. And probably if he does do that, he'll end up recouping all the money he ever spent on financing and furthering his son's career. So
they could be pretty chuffed with that.
Job well done. Job well done.
So then, obviously we talked about Stroll. I know you've worked quite closely with Vettel. Can I ask, because Vettel's been through quite a lot, so in his Red Bull days, especially in the British media, wasn't very much liked a bit. And then... Because
of it?
Yeah.
Do you remember he stood that on the podium?
I remember. But then he very much became one of the most beloved drivers while he was at Ferrari. And then
good comms, you see, good PR, that's why. No, but carry on.
But then he moved to Aston Martin, and I know you worked closely with him. So can I ask, what was it like working with Vettel?
Well, I'm very lucky. I've always been lucky. I've always been a lucky man. And I've worked with 4 world champions, closely with 4 world champions, which is Lewis Hamilton, Jenson Button, Fernando Alonso and Sebastian Vettel. And all of them have been fascinating experiences to work with. Now, you asked me about Seb. So I arrived in Aston Martin for the first year of Aston Martin, which is 2021, and so did he. And we both did those 2 years. And I remember, I knew him already. I'd interviewed him when I was a journalist before I'd ever joined Aston Martin. I remember interviewing him in 2006 and 2007, before he got to Formula One, when he was a young driver for BMW Sauber. And thought he was clever, and also for various reasons I'd kind of I kind of got to know him a bit even when I was at McLaren.
Yeah.
And but never worked with him obviously at that time. But when we got to Aston Martin together, it was like, oh, I know you, and we had a little chat. And I said, so what? He's a 4-time world champion.
Yep.
You're going to have to do some comms work because that's my job, as comms director or chief comms officer. So what kind of thing do you particularly like? What kind of thing do you particularly not like? I just want to put forward a strategy for you going across this coming year, but I want to understand what would float your boat or what would drive you bonkers. So we started talking about it, and I remember him saying, look, if I could, what I'd actually like to do, since you ask, is do something that makes a positive difference to the world, if that's possible. And including children, because actually I've never really been able to work with children in any of my comms initiatives, because when I was at Red Bull, some of the time while he was racing at Red Bull, you couldn't even buy Red Bull. I think in France and Canada it was illegal. You could buy cigarettes and alcohol, but you couldn't buy Red Bull in France or Canada. Banned.
Yeah.
So and we all know it's not very good for you. It's rather tons of sugar and all the rest of it. Anyway, so not ideal for children. And then when he went to Ferrari, it was Marlboro. Also not ideal for children. so he couldn't really do that kind of thing. But when he got to Aston Martin, he said, there's no reason we can't do that. I said, well, of course we can do that. And then he started talking about the environment. He started talking about human rights, women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights, litter, all these things that interested him. And so unofficially, I never told him this term, but I invented and shared with my team, right, what we're going to do is we're never going to call it this publicly, but it's the Saint Seb program. So we're going to think of things to do that, if you can imagine them, the message is Saint Seb. We're going to make him a saint. And by the way, he's a great guy, so it's authentic.
Yeah.
It's not like trying to do Saint Seb with, Max Verstappen, Saint Max.
Yeah.
I rate Max very high, but good luck trying to do Saint Max.
Yeah.
It ain't going to work. It's not what he's like. Saint Seb, different. So I thought, let's do that. And everyone thought it was a good idea, and we started doing it. And every time he said something, we think, is there a Saint Seb Jackanory there? And an example was in the 2021 British Grand Prix. I remember him coming over a few weeks before that to drive the simulator, the Aston Martin factory at Silverstone. And he said, what is the matter with your country? I left my home in Geneva, Switzerland, early this morning. A car was sent for me, drove from my house to the airport. Everything was immaculate, not a drop of litter anywhere. Then when you sent a car to pick me up at Heathrow, all the way down the M4, all the way around the M25 and all the way down the M40, a whole load of litter on the side of the road. Cans, bottles. What are you like? It's a beautiful country. Why do you throw shit all over it? And I said, it was a good point. Aha. Saint Seb idea.
Yep.
So we had the idea of him doing litter picking with fans, a number of fans, after the race. So he raced in the British Grand Prix, didn't race in all of it because the car let him down after 40 laps, but still 40 laps.
Yep.
And after it, he went out with black bags and went to the grandstands with some fans that we'd invited prior, who were very excited, Seb fans. But we said, you've got to work. You're not just standing there looking, doing selfies.
Yeah.
You've got to actually do the work. And I thought he might do 5 minutes with cameras. No. He was back-breaking work, having raced in the Grand Prix that very afternoon, picking up litter, tying up the bags, throwing it in the van, going back again and again and again and again. And when the refuse truck was ready to depart to drive down to the Northampton recycling depot, that was the end of it.
Yeah.
He said, no, I'm going to get in the truck. I'm going to get in the truck with the lads, and I'm going to see actually how things are recycled and separated, how they separate the cans from the bottles, from the cardboard, from the paper. And he did that. We weren't with him anymore. Off he went with the bin men. And and there's only one picture from it, I think, which is in fact taken by one of the bin men on his phone. And but he did that because he's interested.
Yeah.
Saint Seb. Now we won awards for that.
Mm-hmm.
As we won, there's a very good website called The Race, run by a company called The Race Media. My good friend Andy Vanderberg was the founder and still runs it as CEO. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I do a podcast for them with my friend Richard Williams, which is called And Colossally That's History. So there you are, you can find that on Apple and Spotify, And Colossally That's History. Anyway, it's Formula 1 history, it's all about Formula 1 history. And the race has an awards, annual awards, and one of the categories is most inspiring. The most inspiring thing that's been done in the whole of motorsport. And we won it for, not officially calling it Saint Seb, but we won it for what we had done with Sebastian Vettel in 2022 it was. And I was delighted to go and collect the prize on behalf of Seb, really. I mean, we did the work, but it was because of what a great guy he is. So he is a great guy. He's genuinely intelligent. He's genuinely thoughtful. And I'll just give you a little story. But, you know, sometimes troubled people contact Formula 1 teams and say, you know, this has gone wrong, or that has gone wrong, or my relation is ill, or my daughter is, or my dad has died, or any kind of things. Yeah. And they contact, and sometimes they say, so can you give us a signed cap? And, you know, you give them a signed cap. But other times you think, well, actually, there's something more we can do. And this is a very sad story that this poor person is struggling with. And we all have ups and downs in our, you know, 80 years or however long we have on this planet.
Of course.
We're all going to have our ups and downs. And if somebody writes to a team like that, the worst thing you can do is ignore them. And I remember a young person writing into me saying they had some problems, quite difficult problems, challenging problems. And I remember telling Seb about it. And he was not just an Aston Martin fan, but a Seb fan. And I remember Seb saying, right, what can I do? I said, well, why don't you do I'll do a little video of you in your, on my iPhone now. And we can post it on the Aston Martin social media things, and you can say, this is a message for so-and-so, and say the name. And he said, no, I don't want to do that, because that will look like I'm showboating and trying to show off. Yeah. He said, can you do a Zoom call or Teams call with him and talk to him, and then I'll just walk into the frame and join. And it will just be then a private thing. Yeah. So I said, yeah, I can do that. So we did do that. And I thought he'd walk in and talk for 5 minutes. He walked in and talked for 25 minutes to this young man who was bowled over that his hero was not only talking
fully to him, made his day.
Yeah, probably made his week or his month. Yeah. And not only talked to him, but talked to him for 25 minutes, and also had bothered to learn. Matt tells me you've had this happen, and you've had this happen. You know, actually we all have troubles. I've had troubles in my life, says Seb, talking about himself. Very humble. And he is, you know, personally, of those 4 world champions, I would say I've enjoyed working with all 4 of them. But the 2 I've enjoyed working with most, with great respect to Alonso and Button, are Hamilton and Vettel. Yes. And the reason is for what they are like off the track as well as on the track. Brilliant drivers on the track, obviously, but what they've done and continue to do off the track is remarkable. Yeah. And that, you know, if you remember, I'm a gay man, LGBTQ+, and we know that Formula 1 races in places that are significantly disadvantageous for LGBTQ+ people. Obviously Saudi Arabia and Qatar, but also Hungary and other places. And Seb and Lewis, both heterosexual men, deciding to come out as supportive of what we call allies, in order to stand up and be counted in support of LGBTQ+ minorities in territories where they are disadvantaged significantly, is brilliant. And both of them wearing, you know, rainbow logos on their helmets in places like Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Hungary is courageous and commendable. And it resonates globally, not just in those countries. And if you're a closeted person in Saudi Arabia, where technically you could be put to death for having gay sex, technically you could. Doesn't happen very often, but technically it is on the statute book. Imagine how powerful it would be in your closeted fear, if you're 16 or 18 or 20 or 40, to know that there's this global superstar who is straight. Sebastian Vettel, married to a woman with 3 kids. And he is happy to stand up and be counted next to me. It's very powerful. And on Twitter, which is a lovely platform in many ways, but is full of toxic cesspit mongers, when people criticise them for it, I'm going to use a bad word, they can go fuck themselves. It's much more important that allies, heterosexual allies, are seen to stand up and be counted in support of LGBTQ plus people. And I'm not just talking about in this nice posh corner of London where we're sitting. Yeah. I'm talking about if you live in Jeddah. I'm talking about if you live in Budapest. I'm talking about if you live in countries you haven't mentioned and don't race in. If you live in Islamabad. Do you think life is easy if you live in Islamabad and you're LGBTQ plus? Obviously not.
Yeah, very courageous from both of them. Especially, because in general as well, F1 as a sport, well, sports in general aren't as open to it all. So for them to come out and supporting it all, very good from them. Yeah, very good. And I mean, Lewis Hamilton as well, going on to him, I know you've got a very good story that I hope that you'd tell, because I know you've got an article on it as well, about you talking to Lewis Hamilton about going to Ferrari.
Aha, yes.
Yeah.
So obviously earlier this year it was announced that Ferrari had hired Lewis Hamilton for 2025. And it was a big shock in many ways. And a huge story. But I happened to have discussed that with him some years ago when I was at McLaren. Obviously he and I had worked together at McLaren for 5 years. I joined in 2008, he'd already had his first year there, 2007, and we worked together very closely actually until he left at the end of 2012. But I continued, I stayed at McLaren. Anyway, we were in a bar in Tokyo. The Japanese Grand Prix is unlike other Grand Prix because often the day after, people don't hurry out. It might be a back-to-back, in which case you fly on to somewhere near. But even when it wasn't, people don't always hurry home. They want to have a day in Tokyo because Tokyo is a great city. And Suzuka isn't a great city. So, a bit like Silverstone. You know, Silverstone's a village, but London's a great city. Yeah. So, Suzuka's, nothing special. But Tokyo is mega. So a lot of the Formula 1 people often want to spend the Monday afterwards in Tokyo. That happens. And because it's a big sport but a small travelling village, you end up congregated in the same places. So surprisingly, you then rub shoulders with each other. And it was always special in that way. Anyway, there was a particular bar, which I think is closed now, in Roppongi, which is a district of Tokyo. Yeah. And I was there with my McLaren colleagues, and then some Williams people came in and some Red Bull people came in and various other people. And then in walks Lewis with some Mercedes engineers. And, you keep to yourself a bit, but then as the beers go down, you might then start chatting, call the Williams guys over, or you start mixing and having a laugh. And some of you have worked together before anyway. It just so happens that you used to work together and then he left and worked for Williams when you used to be at McLaren, so on and so forth. So anyway, Lewis came over and said hello to us, just generally, hello guys, and we were crap at that time. McLaren Honda wasn't going well, and obviously he was winning everything. Yeah. I'm thinking it would have been about 2014, something like that. But anyway, it was whatever I wrote, because I checked my diaries, so I wrote about it. But it was that kind of time, maybe 50, maybe 2050, something like that anyway. But he was winning everything, and we were doing hopelessly. And anyway, after a while, Lewis and I splintered off and started having a tete-a-tete, a bit of a chat, only for 5-10 minutes. And I remember saying to him, would you ever come back to us, McLaren? Would you ever? And he said, well, never say never. I still look out for you guys. Amazingly, when they, after qualifying and I look at the screen and I see, am I pole or did Nico beat me? So I'm P2 because he was either P1 or P2 most of the time at that point. So, you know, I checked that, and then I don't know why, I always just scan down to find you guys, because McLaren always still means something special to me.
Yeah.
And I know I have to scan a long way down these days, and it slightly breaks my heart. And so we talked a bit about McLaren. He said, well, you know, there might have to be certain changes, or there might have to be this, but, you know, never say never. But what I really want to do is win a championship or a few more championships with Mercedes and then go to Ferrari. Mm-hmm. That's what I really want to do. And I asked him a bit about it, and that's really all he said. He didn't say, I plan to, I'm going to do this, but he did say, and the way he said it and looked at me, he just said, that's how I'd love to finish my career. You know, to win championships for McLaren, Mercedes and Ferrari.
That's F1 completed.
How cool would that be? Yeah. That is the royal flush, isn't it? Yeah, that would be fantastic. So that is what I'm going to do, he said. And, you know, the years went past, and I'd be honest, I thought, well, perhaps he's never going to do that.
Yeah.
But obviously the plan had never died in his mind, and he did do that. And personally, you know, he'll be 40 when he first races a red Formula 1 car. You know, when he first races a Scuderia Ferrari Rosso Corsa car, which is special. It's absolutely special. Whatever anybody says, as Sebastian Vettel said, people who say they're not Ferrari fans are Ferrari fans. And I think there is a bit of that about Ferrari. It is special. Scuderia Ferrari, Rosso Corsa, all that business. And he will be 40 when he does that. And I was so pleased he won at Silverstone this year, because he silenced the doubters, and he quelled the begrudgers by saying and demonstrating and showing, I've still got it. I have still got it. And if that car is quick next year, he will win it. So will Charles Leclerc. Don't get me wrong. Definitely, if that car is quick enough, Lewis Hamilton will win it. And if he ended up winning the World Championship, aged 40, hey, what a great story. Drive to Survive. You won't even need it. You won't need it, because the real story will be good enough anyway.
I mean, yeah, Leclerc and Hamilton, both battling it out. I mean,
Wait, do you rate Leclerc? I mean, how high do you rate him?
Oh, I think he's very good.
Yeah, he's very quick. Very quick.
He's got a few issues that I think he's got similar with Lando Norris, where there are times where when the pressure's on, they can bottle it a little bit. But overall, I think especially with Leclerc, he's ready to go when Ferrari's up.
I think so. He's proper quick. By the way, I think Carlos Sainz is a good driver as well, very good driver. But I think Hamilton and Leclerc could be very exciting.
So then, after all of this F1 talk, I have to ask you, because you've mentioned it a little bit, I have noticed, what does the future look like for you? I know you've got your new agency, Diagonal Comms, correct?
Correct.
And you've said, you've mentioned a few names. Could you tell us a bit about it? And will you be representing any drivers?
Well, Diagonal Comms is only just over a year old, so I'm obviously well seasoned in terms of working in motorsport comms and PR.
Yep.
But I'm quite new to running my own agency. We started in the summer of 2023, so we're building up nicely. We have a number of good clients. We do the entire British Touring Car Championship, comms, PR, content creation, digital marketing, the whole thing. We send people to the British Touring Car races. I go to some of them. I don't go to all of them, but I do go to some of them. By the way, I enjoy them enormously. I think it's a great vibe. It's a great championship, and I think we'd love to continue to storytell, Jackanory-tell around the BTCC as it develops. And Alan Gow, the CEO, is a great friend of mine and a brilliant operator, I think. And I think it's great racing. So we do that. We do Pro Drive, obviously famous for rallying, but all other sorts of motorsport. And we do a number of different clients, which I'm not going to be so corny as to list all the way through. But I will talk about a couple of drivers. Because we don't yet do any Formula 1 drivers, but we may do. But we have two drivers I'd talk about just because they're quite different. One is Pat Hoytzenroder. There you are. Australian. 18, racing in GB3, very promising young driver. He's in his first year of GB3, which are basically Formula 3 cars, or nearest, damn it. The leading single-seater feeder series in the UK. It's a faster and more sophisticated car than a Formula 4 car, but it's not as fast and sophisticated as an FIA Formula 3 car.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, it's a GB3 car. It's the right thing he should be doing at 18. He's in his first season. He started off gently getting used to it. He's just had his first podium, and he's a pleasure to work with. Really clever, hard-working, fit as a fiddle, courteous and ambitious young driver. And his mentor is David Brabham. Huge name, Le Mans winner, Formula 1 driver, still racing, age 58, and a mate of mine. I had lunch with him the other day, by the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And David is his mentor, and I obviously do his comms, and David and I work together to guide and shape him as far as we can, or guide and shape his career, I should say. I very much hope that he will continue to do as well as he possibly can do in the stages that's required to get to Formula 1. And look, his ambition and his mission is to get to Formula 1. And I always enjoyed working with young drivers because, yes, I've been fortunate enough to work with Formula 1 world champions. But everyone has to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And everyone's been 18 once. And the idea of being able to be part of something, we might succeed, we might not succeed. But if we manage to get him to Formula 1, what a wonderful thing that would be. So that's the kind of, comms and PR is not just about what you say about what you do, or what you get people to write about what you do. It's also about what you do per se.
Yeah.
So helping that situation to come about whereby he can fulfill his dreams and reach Formula 1. So that's one thing. We also have another driver, very different driver, also from Australia though, but otherwise very different. Caitlin Wood, female driver, who I got to know when she was at W Series, because I spent a little bit of time at W Series. I was one of the founders of it. David Coulthard brought me into it towards the end of 2018, where then we announced it, and then we went racing in 2019.
Yeah.
And then didn't in 2020 because we took a sabbatical because of COVID. And then I left and joined Aston Martin, but it raced on in 2021 and 2022 and sadly didn't thrive. But I still think it did its job, and it might have thrived if some of us had stayed. It might not have done. We don't know. But anyway, I wasn't there for its demise.
Yeah.
But I was there for its launch and heyday, which was probably 2018, the launch, and the heyday 2019, pre-COVID. And Caitlin Wood was one of the drivers. And W Series doesn't exist anymore, but she's now racing in the Porsche Sprint GB Challenge, which supports the British Touring Car Championship, as does the Porsche Carrera Cup. So there's two Porsche support races for the TOCA platform, which is the British Touring Car Championship. Yeah. She's sponsored, or she's partnered by Barbie, obviously in the wake of the movie, the Barbie movie. And she doesn't just race, she also uses her platform, a bit Seb Vettel-like, in order to do good, if you don't mind me putting something in such a trite way. So she will invite girls and young women to her races. She goes and does speeches in schools, and basically to say you don't have to be a boy or a man to be interested in motorsport. You don't have to be a boy or a man to race, and you definitely don't have to be a boy or a man to become a mechanic or an engineer. Yeah. And I can explain all of these things, and actually if you do your STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, at school and college, university, you can end up with brilliant jobs in motorsport. And she wants to tell that story via the platform of Going Racing, and we're helping her with that, exactly so. So, that's just two drivers that we work with. But we are in talks with, but I can't say, but we are in talks with Formula 1 drivers.
Ooh, okay.
And it doesn't mean that we will end up working with them, but we are in talks with them, and with Formula 1 teams. And, I still know everybody in Formula 1, or almost everybody in Formula and they kind of know me. And you know, well, they do know me. And you know, I also write a weekly column for Motorsport, which is in its 100th year. It was founded in 1924, so it's the oldest and most venerable magazine, but it's also a vibrant and successful website. And by the way, it's the only magazine in Motorsport whose circulation is rising, which is cool. And I'm very proud to be involved in it. So I write a weekly column, kind of about the history of the sport with a topical peg, usually. And but sometimes about the current scene. I mean, I just wrote my most recent column was about 2 bits of news. One, Kevin Magnussen coming to the end of his Haas career, and 2, Ralf Schumacher coming out as being in a loving relationship with another man.
Yeah.
So, you know, which obviously I think was I'm supportive of and
of course.
commend. So anyway, I enjoy doing that, and I do a weekly podcast, and I've already plugged that once already. So I like doing that. That keeps my name in the frame vaguely, and means that people don't necessarily forget about me quite as quickly as they otherwise would. And I tweet daily, and I do the odd bit of corporate speaking, not public speaking. I go and speak to C-suite. You know, I go and the other day, when I say the other day, a few weeks ago, I went to Bucharest to speak to an oil company and their executives. So I do stuff like that, and of course I run my agency. And running my agency is great fun. Diagonal Comms, we do comms, PR, content creation, social media management, and we also do influencer deployment. And it's good fun. And digital marketing. Did I mention that? We do digital marketing as well. So there we go. So that's what I do. So I'm a jack of all trades, really.
A few years ago, I say a few, about 12 years ago, I would have been about 8, 9, 10 years old. And of course, we've mentioned you're, my auntie.
Yes.
And I was a Jenson Button fan, and she asked you to get Jenson Button to sign a hat directly to me.
There you go, and there it is.
Yep, and this is the exact hat that you gave to Jenson Button, and he put to Zach, and he had the signature.
He did indeed, and I can tell you that is a genuine signature because I know his signature very, very well. Yeah, Jenson's a great guy.
I just want to say thank you very much for it, because it's one of my most treasured gifts I've
ever
got.
Put it on.
Yeah.
There you go. How about that?
Perfect.
Let's have an applause for Jenson.
Yeah. But anyway, yes. Thank you so much for coming onto the channel. It was lovely. It was a pleasure to have you on it.
It's been a pleasure to chat to you, Zach. And I wish you luck with the channel. I wish you luck with your career.
Thank you very much.
I wish you luck with everything.
And I wish you luck with everything going on, Diagonal Comms, everything. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. And I'll see you all later for the next video that is on the Zach F1 channel. Bye bye.